Okay, hi. So here we are in Iceland, and I've got the Sony A6000, which Sony Singapore has kindly loaned to me for 2 weeks for shooting in Iceland. This is the beta model. This is a prototype. Well, it's not the full selling model, and you can see it's snowing, but this camera is performing amazingly well, even though it's not supposed to be weatherproof or weather sealed. And we'll find out how it performs for the next 2 weeks in snowy, cold Iceland. Okay, so while on the topic of cameras, just a few floppy tips for shooting in the snow. Number one, bring stacks and stacks of spare and extra batteries. Like as good as the Sony A6000 is, and most other cameras made by Sony, the batteries really run out really fast. I'm using up an average of about 2 to 3 batteries in a day. That's number one. Number two is gloves. Make sure you got a pair of really good gloves, preferably with a like a little rubber tip or something like that, so you can actually feel the controls and the buttons on your camera. And number three is, as much as I don't like zoom lenses, for shooting in the snow, I have to admit the zoom lenses are very handy, because you do not want to be changing lenses out in the snow. The snow can get into your camera, your sensor, and it'll be ruined. Alright, so in that case, in these kind of situations, a zoom lens is really handy. Or bring two cameras, one with your wide angle lens and one with your standard or your long lens. Well, by now everyone knows that the A6000 has got a very good AF system. So how does it compare against the NEX5R? Well, here we have, in dim lighting, you can see the 5R does hunt about quite a fair bit. Not very good for video. On the other hand, the A6000 does it in a much snappier manner. Definitely a much better AF system, very much improved. Now that's how fast the A6000 is. You know, that's like maybe 10 frames per second. It's really fast for a small little compact mirrorless system camera like this. Well done. Alright, another couple more tips. Generally speaking, if you're shooting in the snow, two things do really help. First thing is a lens hood. It keeps some of the snow off your lens. Alright, so you know, you just have a little less condensation and water on your lens. And the other thing, which I really don't like, but I think there is no choice but to attach it, is a UV filter. Well, it just protects your investment a little bit much more, and looks like the snow and the rain is coming back again. Well, on paper, the electronic viewfinder of the A6000 is inferior, or rather lower spec, than the electronic viewfinder of the NEX6, the 7, or even the external one of the NEX5 series, alright? But guess what? After using it for 1 week, this is actually better. Why is that so? The contrast is actually lower. On the NEX6 and the NEX7, the electronic viewfinder had higher contrast, and what happens when you point it at a high contrast situation, the blacks tend to be choked up. You can't see them at all, there's no detail, it's all just, you know, just jet black. This one, because of its lower contrast, actually feels more organic, more like a real optical viewfinder. It's a much more, well, it's a lot more comfortable to use, and it's definitely a lot better. Ignore the numbers. Image quality wise, the Sony A6000 is definitely about 1 to 2 stops in terms of high ISO performance better than the NEX7. I haven't been able to open the raw files, only the JPEGs at this point, but at ISO 3200 the files are still, I would say, reasonably clean. So I've been using the Sony A6000 for about 2 weeks. And I can tell you that this is a very good camera. There are 3 things in particular I want to talk about very quickly. First thing is that right now you can finally set the camera on manual mode, and you actually have a auto ISO selection option, which is very handy for video work. So you could be setting the shutter speed on 1/50 if you're filming at 25 frames per second, and a specific aperture for the desired depth of field look, and the camera will just match those settings with an appropriate ISO. Very handy. And the other thing is that they've finally done away with that awful playback selection between stills and video, which was in the NEX menu system. And instead, right now, you can just switch directly between stills and video in chronological sequence. without that nasty going back to menu and selecting this, selecting that, which is a huge improvement. Thank you, Sony. And the third thing I want to talk about is the MR mode, which is basically memory recall. So you could actually pre-select or preset 3 specific settings over there, and you could actually have, for example, one on a high resolution stills mode, one for video mode, and one for maybe 50 frames per second video mode, stuff like that. Very handy. Personally, I would prefer it if it was on a C1 and C2 and C3 kind of setting, but you know what, this is pretty good as well. So I would say that this camera is definitely the best mirrorless compact system camera, APS-C size, that Sony has ever made, and I'm definitely looking forward to see what else could Sony do with this in the near future. After 2 weeks of using the Sony A6000 in Iceland, I would say this is definitely one of the best handling new cameras I've used, and the AF performance is phenomenal. The dials are tighter now, which is, well, compared to the NEX7 that is, and it's definitely one step further in the right direction. Great job. The viewfinder is lower in spec, but actually performance way better, much more natural looking. Great job. There is, however, one thing I'm not too excited about, which is the name, Sony A6000. Come on, Sony, give it a better name. I mean, what? A6000 sounds like a calculator from the 1980s, you know, that's not very sexy. But, well, aside from that, this is definitely a great little camera. I love it so much, I wish I didn't have to return it to Sony.